Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Suchon.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we're heading up the coast to Los Angeles. And topics this week, documentaries, short films, and feature films. I'm excited about this week's guest. His name is Patrick Green. We attended San Diego State at the same time, roughly the mid-90s. He is a filmmaker, storyteller, and producer. He is the co-founder of Someone Great Pictures. Patrick, my friend, it's great to have you on the Where You At podcast. Thanks for joining us.
What's up, Josh? Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let me give a little bit more background about Patrick. He is an award-winning filmmaker, writer, journalist. He tells inspiring, thought-provoking stories through a genre film lens. He has written or directed projects for Tony Scott, Ebony Studios, Falcon, Ring TV, ID Agency. His debut feature film is titled Sincerely Los Angeles. It's a colorful, heartfelt love letter from the City of Angels to Kobe Bryant. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of his other projects. He has also been a longtime journalist. He has written in LA Magazine, OC Weekly, LA Taco, Modern Luxury. We could go on. And I always find it interesting, Patrick, someone like yourself who's just done all these different things. And I was sitting here thinking, like, where do I begin? Where do I begin to tell the story of Patrick? And so let me flip this to you. When you're getting ready to work on a project that you know is going to take months, maybe even years, where do you begin when you start to tell these really big picture stories?
That's a great question, because I think when you're young, you're full of ideas, and you every day you wake up with something that you get really excited about and you kind of dive headfirst in. And then the older you get, you realize how long they take, whether it be an article, a feature piece, a film. And then your ideas kind of, you live with them more before diving in, and you kind of see how much legs they have and how passionate you are about it. You know, passion, I think, is something like in all things, passion, whether it be romance or, something you love, that dies down after a while. And then you're left with kind of the real thing. And you have to decide if the real thing is good enough to pursue and dedicate, your life to. So I think with age comes wisdom, in that you can't do all these ideas. So you really try to focus in on the idea that you're passionate about, but also that you can't live without telling. And then you kind of dedicate your craft, you dedicate your time. These things take so long to make, especially documentaries, that, you're going to be living with it for many years. And so you better not only love it, but enjoy doing it, enjoy the people you're working with. And, it's a process, and you kind of got to fall in love with the process more than the subject matter itself. Because when you finish, I think that's when you kind of realize, wow, it was more about the journey than the actual thing itself that it started as.
So once you realize that you do have this idea and you do have enough of a love affair with it that you want to pursue it, are you the type that wants to outline it immediately? Are you a spreadsheet guy? Are you a write it down guy? Are you, these are the people I need to interview. These are the long shots for me to interview. These are, where do you go next with outlining what you need to do?
Yeah, my wife will tell you I'm not a spreadsheet guy. She's part of our relationship. No, I think it starts with research. Obviously the ideas, I'm still old school. I still get the newspaper, the hard copy, and that's where a lot of my ideas come from, or, a magazine article. And so I start with that. And then really, I think the first step is doing my own research, and, reading every book I can get my hands on, reading every article, and really becoming an expert at that topic so that I'm able to pitch it if I meet someone in an elevator, as the saying goes, I become the expert of that subject. That's where it starts. Because if I don't know what I'm talking about, which a lot of people in the business do, it kind of comes through to the people who actually know what you're talking about. And then I think the second step is, yeah, like, how do I tell this story best? I always look at stories, and I talked to the SDSU class, Temple's class a couple weeks ago, and I told them is like the first step that you really take is becoming the expert, and then really figuring out how to tell that story in your own way. I think like 90% of storytellers will still tell this story in this particular way or variations of it. I'm always looking for that 10%. What's my way into this story that no one has? And that's easy to say, but really it's about like, who am I and what do I bring to this story that adds to it? If I'm just telling a story to tell it, I'm going to tell it like the 90%. But if I'm the one to tell the story in my own way, I can find a new way into it that then gives an audience new insight into it. Maybe it brings in an audience that is necessarily not interested in that subject, but they're interested in the way I'm telling it through this different way. That's really important to me. And that's kind of why, starting off as a journalist, I kind of didn't fit into a box. I kind of did things differently. And you might remember, but I always remember it, you being one of my first editors and me kind of not wanting to go to the game and tell the story of like what happened. Like I was more interested in like, you let me, you were one of the first people that kind of let me do my thing, which I wrote like columns, and I wrote like columns like where it was just me talking about sports. I'd be on the toilet. There's actually a photo I have of me sitting on the toilet. It was like notes from the thinking man's place or something like that. But there's a kind of a different way of like telling these sports stories, which can kind of get monotonous, right? Who won, who did this and that. So it kind of started off with that. I've always wanted to tell stories in my own way. So that's really important for me. And that's always what I tell people is like, what are you bringing to the story that it doesn't have yet? And then the third thing I do is, part of that research is finding out who these people are that can help me tell the story in that way. I'm not necessarily looking for the typical sound bites. I'm looking for the people who are going to maybe bring a different perspective of it. If they've done interviews about this subject, in other documentaries or stories, I necessarily don't want to talk to them. They might be the more famous person, but I'd rather talk to the person who gives me new insight into it, because chances are, we live in a world where there's so much information out there that the story I'm doing has probably been told already, but my way has never been told. So I'm going to reach out to the people that can help me tell that story. So I'll make a list of people who I can, get to. I think that's another important thing too, is like, and it's tough when you're starting out, but be realistic. If I want to do a documentary, let's say like on the Kobe Bryant murals, am I going to be able to talk to Michael Jordan? Like I might know someone that knows someone that's someone, but like, no, there's going to be no chance. So let me figure out someone who I can talk to. Okay, Lamar Odom, I know someone that knows him. I can reach out to his manager, so forth. Oscar De La Hoya, the same thing. So it's like, figure out who can, help you tell the story in that way, and figure out if they're attainable. And then, I'm really, people are starting to call me like, again, I'm not that, but they're joking with me. Like I'm the Ken Burns of LA now, like docs. And because I'm telling these kind of sports adjacent stories that really represent the city. They're not necessarily about sports. They're more about culture and how sports influences culture in this city, especially LA. We have these iconic people everywhere, and the stars, seem to shine above them, like Kobe, like Otani you're seeing now. And then, then laying that out and then trying to get them to help you tell your story.
All right, so you mentioned Kobe a couple of times. Let's get into, we're going to bounce around in this, but I want to set the tone for Sincerely Los Angeles. You said Kobe Bryant in murals, and we're beginning this podcast with where do you begin? So tell us, where did you begin, or how did it begin when it comes to Kobe Bryant and murals?
Yeah, obviously, growing up, first grew up in Orange County and then, always a Laker fan, going to Laker games, my whole life, moving down to San Diego, but still following the Lakers. And Kobe, came into the league when I was still in college, like my first or second year. So, to see someone at that age and, you're young and, he had the kind of, the life story that we kind of all dream of, especially guys of that age, coming to LA, trying to make a name for yourself. I always saw him as an artist. I wrote an Instagram post like the day he passed was like about me always viewing him as an artist, the way he would take all his favorite basketball players' moves and incorporate his version of that. That's what like artists do. You take when you're young, you kind of imitate in a way, but as you get older, you're able to kind of take things in and then make it your own. The way he moved, the way he was dedicated to his craft, those are all like things that artists like we do. So when he passed away, it really had an effect on me. Probably like the biggest effect, it might be corny to say, but since my parents passed, like felt like a relative passed or a good friend. And my wife would walk in and I'd be crying on the couch for 2 days watching YouTube highlights. And she's like, what's going on with you? Like, did you know him? And I'm like, no, but it felt like I did because he was in my living room for 20 years, his passing really set off this kind of crazy year that was 2020, where we have actually in the doc, there's a USA Today article with like, Kobe and Gianna Bryant die in helicopter crash. And in the corner is like COVID. It's like COVID in China, like, and so these things were happening at the same time, these generational type stories. And so, remember back in the day, we were like driving around looking for toilet paper. That's what my wife would send me off to do or pick up food. And so I'm driving around town and I'm in this kind of weird place mentally. And, I see a Kobe mural because they started popping up right after he passed away throughout the city and in different parts of the city, not parts of the city that people think of Los Angeles, but like what I call the heart and soul of LA, which is like Boyle Heights, East LA, Watts, so forth, the Valley. So I'd see these murals and I'd park and get out and, I'd be in my mask and I'm supposed to stand 6 feet away from someone. And I'd just be there with random people and we'd start conversations through our mask about, oh, hey, do you remember like when Kobe did that? Like, oh yeah. And we'd start these conversations about Kobe and our memory that's tied to that image that's on the mural. And then we'd have a 10-minute conversation, take an Instagram photo, and then get back in our car and drive off, and I'd never see them again. So that kept happening. And it was a way almost for like us to find some humanity in a time when it was just not present. And so, or not even encouraged, right? So that's kind of where the idea came from. And obviously no one was working at the time, especially in film because it was lockdown. So I got a couple buddies and my producing partner, we just went out and started filming murals, trying to tracking down who were these artists? Like, why are they painting these murals? Are they getting paid? Who's, so that's where it started. And then it went to business owners and all these different things. And that's where the idea started. And then we, did things. I got my master's in film and as a screenwriter, and there's certain rules that you do when you make a film. And I basically said, I'm not going to do that this time as a director. I'm going to do my own thing. And so what I did was I released a trailer with like maybe 30% of the film shot, which is crazy. You don't, you release a trailer when it's done. But I did it just to like kind of like plant a flag, but also like, hey, I'm doing this and it's important story. And not look at me, but look at what these artists are doing. And, I'm here to tell that story. And so from that, it just like all these media people started calling me and doing interviews. And I kind of limited it because I really wanted to focus on making the film. We had overtures about, and people coming in to buy it or invest. And we just kind of kept it really on the ground level because that's where the story started. And that's where I wanted to keep it. It's really a story about the people of Los Angeles and their love for Kobe and Gianna. And so the idea started, and then, your first year, everything's moving fast, but 4 years later, I just finished it. So again, that's another thing of what I just talked about, is really falling in love with the project, but really falling in love with the making of it, because you have to, because there is a lot of long days and meetings and stuff that has not unrelated to the film making process, which is often the most easiest. But yeah, so it started from that, putting out that trailer, and then getting friends to invest, then, because now I had something to show them. We did everything DIY for the first like year, and then we were able to put out another trailer, which I put out on Kobe Day a couple years ago. And then that's when I started taking meetings of like, okay, I think I need help now, because this is getting a little bigger than I envisioned. And, I started as a street art doc, then it became something bigger. So we were able to bring on two production companies, Falcon and Ebony, legacy Black culture brand. So Sincerely Los Angeles will be the first film from them, which is a huge honor. But they were able to give us some more investment, which allowed us then to actually have a bigger crew and to film with people like I mentioned, Oscar De La Hoya, Big Boy, Warren G, Chloe Kim, Ben Baller, just a bunch of kind of LA culture people. And we got to fly out to Atlanta to film with Killer Mike. So it became this kind of bigger thing, which I think it ended up being good because the story is so big. Kobe is obviously a global personality, and we were able to get murals from India, Brazil, Italy, Japan, all across the world, footage that we have in the film. Sitting on the couch and going from there to actually having all those people in the film, and 4 years later, I couldn't have imagined it. It was something I started as really kind of like the artists. I found out, like I think the artists wanted to. What do artists do when they want to? They're feeling something. They go paint a wall, right? What does a filmmaker do? What does he do that when he's feeling a certain way and he wants to express that? He makes a film that talks about that. And so I think the film is really my love letter through the artist to Kobe. But yeah, I think it's a long road, but I'm pretty happy with where it ended up.
When you go about doing these interviews, talk us through the process of what you want it to look like, what you want the background to look like, the theme, the vibe, the lighting, the color, whether it's an artist on the side of the road or whether it's this famous celebrity. How does your mind work? Because it's one thing when you're just calling someone up on the phone because you need a quote for the next day's newspaper, entirely different for a documentary. What's your vision for these interviews?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as you get more experience, it's a way to tell story without hearing words, right? Which is like, I'm always looking for a background that says something about the person without saying it outright. Like looking at my background, you see like my son, you see, street art. That's kind of what my vibe is I'm giving to whoever is on the other side, because it says something about me. So I'm always looking for places that reflect the subject, the person I'm interviewing. And, I think it's important also to like find a space that kind of is different, but kind of says that evokes that person's vibe. And then, you can, I think lighting wise is something, I'm always learning about, coming from a writing background, directing and all the mechanics and technology, lighting and cameras, like that's all kind of things I'm learning, that I've gotten a lot better at. But like I'm a writer, like at heart. So, and interviewing is probably one of my stronger attributes too. So yeah, creating a vibe also like if you're filming at, let's say, someone's house or a place that they feel comfortable, that's really important, because then you really, I think with interviews, it's really not about asking them questions. It's really about getting them comfortable to talk, to have a conversation. And so, with interviewing, I'm sure it's just like those first couple questions are kind of like you're just setting the mood. You're setting maybe a connection. You're establishing a connection. Maybe we both have kids. Maybe we both came from the same part of the city, or maybe we like the same team. And, it's establishing that rapport where this person can trust me. And then really it's like questions pertaining to what I want to talk about. Obviously I send talking points, but I never like send questions and then just rifle off the questions, because really interviewing to me is not asking questions. It's about listening. It's about kind of going where the conversation takes you. Of course, you're there to get, information about what you want to talk about in terms of whether it be an article or film. But you also want to let the people talk and get there to the places you need to go themselves, rather than trying to force them in. Because then feels natural. It feels more of like you're participating as well. I think journalism gets such a bad rap today as well, of like people coming with an agenda. People are always saying, and you're just here to get some sound bites and, tell your story with my words. I never want to do that. I want to tell the person's story, and I want to accentuate that with the background, with the B-roll, with ever that encompasses what they're talking about and who they are. So yeah, those are like, it's always scary when you have to go interview someone at their office, because office, like school lighting, is just the worst. White backgrounds is terrible. But yeah, it's a cool way. Actually, I love like getting on like Peerspace or, those sites and kind of going through like a possible, it's basically scouting, like you're scouting a location. It's always exciting because you're trying to bring some character. I think interviews and people you choose are so important. It's like casting a film for documentaries. You're really like, these people that you pick and choose, they're going to be your people in your film. So choose wisely and make them represent who they are in, the best way. You're always trying to show them respect, and you're always trying to get them to tell their story in an honest way. So getting them comfortable is the most important.
For this next question, you can either use the Kobe Bryant Sincerely Los Angeles as an example or something else. But when it comes to how long is this going to be? And you mentioned with the Kobe documentary about how it started at this, and then it got to this, then it got to this. Take us through the process of deciding, how long is this going to be? Is it 30 minutes? Is it an hour? Is it a 4-part series? And how you come to learn what the proper length is for something.
Yeah, that's tough. Obviously, your first instinct is to make it as long as you need to. But then, like, obviously the producers say you can't do that. And sometimes they're right. That's probably one of the few things they're right about. Because I think our ideas as editors, right? Like, are like, we fall in love with some story, let's say, and like we turn in like 1,200 words for like 600 word thing. It's like our natural instinct is like to tell that story in its totality, but you can't always, especially today's audience, right? It's people just clicking through things, skimming through things. So you really want to capture their attention. And I think my screenwriting background really helps with that, because you're always taught to get the person on the first page. Just like in journalism, you're supposed to get people, in that first paragraph. So I think it starts there of like documentaries. The other thing too is it's not a script. So you go into it thinking it's one thing, and 99 times out of 100, it's going to be something else by the time you get there. They're really made in the edit when you gather stuff and then you're like, oh, I need this. Like for Sincerely Los Angeles, I know I wanted to talk about the 90s because the 90s were a really interesting time in LA, starting with like the Northridge earthquakes. There was Rodney King. There were obviously the riots. There was the Dodgers sucked. The Lakers had like, I think Anthony Peeler was their best player, like Ben Baller says. And, it was like just a weird time, and we needed like a new hero. So I needed someone to talk about the 90s. So, who's that? Who's that guy? And this is like when we've filmed, we were editing now, So I went and, reached out to one of my friends, Esteban Oriol, who's an amazing photographer, like iconic LA photographer, to talk about the 90s, because he took a lot of pictures from that era. We got him, and then we got Ben Baller, who's a celebrity jeweler who has a hip hop background, and he was running around town during those times, club promoting and stuff. So like that was something that we'd been filming for 3 years, and like once we were editing, we went out and targeted those people and we did the interviews then. So that's the cool thing about docs, is like it is a long process, but in that process you're allowed to play more, in terms of I need this for that, or I need this photo, or hey, let's go shoot this mural. We didn't get it right, we want it when it's sunset or whatever it may be. You can still make it as you're going. The time wise is really, I think projects tell you how long they need to be eventually once you get going. I'm working on a new project about Chavez Ravine that it could be a film, but it's just so rich. And the more interviews I do, it's almost like the film Chinatown. It just keeps unraveling into like something new. And so I'm envisioning that as a docu-series, but you envision things, they tell you what they are, but really it comes down to what can you find money for. That's what it really is, to be honest with you. What will people give you money for? Obviously, if it's a docu-series, a 3-episode thing, it's going to cost more than a feature film doc, right? So you need to know what it is and how to tell it, and it will tell you how long. But yeah, you have to kind of play the game of like, what will they give me money for? And that's kind of the age-old adage of Hollywood, of trying to constantly chase that money to make the things you want.
Well, you mentioned the Chavez Ravine project. Tell us more about that project and where did it begin?
I grew up in Anaheim, but I was always a Dodger fan. One of my first memories is maybe like 4 years old, going to Dodger Stadium and throwing gum at Dusty Baker. Like I remembered like those are some of my first childhood memories. So diehard Dodger fan.
Wait, did you literally throw the gum from your mouth at
No, no,
Dusty?
no, 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 no. It was the 80s. So no, you throw sticks of gum at him and he would pick it up and like eat some of it. It was just like classic 80s movie type stuff. But yeah, probably not now. Love the Dodgers. And I was, at the Kirk Gibson game. People don't believe me, but I was there. Huge Dodger fan my whole life. Even when I lived in San Diego, I would wear my Dodger, gear and, taunt the Padres. About 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, I was at a game. I live very close to the stadium now. I can see the fireworks from my balcony, and I love going there with my son now. And so about 10, 12 years ago, I was at a game with one of my friends, Marco, who's an even bigger Dodger fan than me. He's got season tickets. And I sat next to his dad, and I'd never seen his dad at a game before. So I was like, oh, hey, why haven't I seen you at the game? I go to games with Marco all the time. And he's like, oh, the Dodgers, they threw my people out of Chavez Ravine. I'm like, what is he? Is he like had too many beers? What's going on here? Like, never heard that story in my life. So of course, it's something that always stuck with me. And I started doing my own research like a couple of years ago when I was in the process of doing the Kobe murals doc, and I wanted to tell another LA story, and just stumbled upon books and research and articles about this community, this Mexican American community that was displaced. It's a long story, but the myth of it is kind of this thing that's permeating over the city that people kind of know. That it's like TikToks about it now and Instagram posts, and that basically say the Dodgers like kicked people out of their homes to build Dodger Stadium. It's way more complicated than that. It was really the city to build public housing, displaced this community. And obviously the land was then used and sold to Walter O'Malley. There's all of these intricate kind of details to it. But make a long story short is, uncovering that story is another kind of centralized story about LA. And really, it's not just about that. It's really about the interesting relationship the Mexican American community has with the Dodgers, beginning with this thing, and then now it evolving to what it is now, where, the thing I love about Dodger Stadium is it's, LA is so vast. You can go from one pocket, you drive a mile, you're in a totally different place than the block you just came from. But one place that really symbolizes what LA is Dodger Stadium. If you want to give someone a taste of what LA looks, feels, sounds, tastes like, you go take them to Dodger Stadium. The food, the music, the people, it's just a great representation of what the city is about. And obviously, the Dodgers have a long legacy of being tied to their community with Jackie Robinson, later with Fernando, obviously, then like Hideo Nomo, Chan Ho Park, and now Otani. They're really, for a city that's so diverse, they're one of the only professional teams that have really got that and really made it a point to kind of show, hey, we represent the city, not just with the names on our front, but the names on the back as well. And that's why I think part of why the Dodger fans are so intertwined with the team. When you wear an LA hat, it's not really it's a Dodgers thing for sure, but it's also like I come from the city thing, what that represents. So yeah, I think it's another LA story, and I'm working on a few other ones, but about again, I think it goes back to, and I'll eventually run out of LA stories, but I'm always thinking from the point of view of like, what can I do? As a screenwriter, you're always thinking of writing things that someone else would do, right? Like, and let them figure it out, how to make a dragon fart hot dogs or whatever it may be. It's like, but as a director, you're really thinking, especially a documentary director, you're thinking of like, what can I go out and film tomorrow? Well, I live in the backyard where there's a bunch of murals out within 10 miles of me. I could probably hit 10 Kobe murals, right? I know I can do that. Chavez Ravine is 3 miles from me. I know I can go up there and film and find out the people who live there and track them down and break bread and, talk with them about their lives. Like, I can do that. I can't necessarily go to Africa and film, the lions or whatever. Like, I'm not capable of that. You see where I live. So, it's about, I think when we're starting out, it's important for people to be realistic. And I think the older you get, the more realistic you get of like, what can I do and what do I do best? And that's really important into storytelling, because there's so many people telling stories now. Everyone has a phone, a camera, a video, great video on it. The cameras now, you can film something for Netflix, with a $3,000, $4,000 camera. So there's so much stories out. Everyone's a storyteller. Everyone's a photographer. Everyone's an influencer. Everyone's this or that. But what do you bring to that's different? Because we're all different, right? We all bring something different in our personality or where we come from or who we are. And I think that's what separates the people who can continue telling stories from the people who kind of fall off or maybe tell a story in a very simpler way, smaller way.
When it comes to creating these films, it's a long process. Let's get into the process of how you got to this point. So let's rewind the clock to the early 90s.
I had hair.
Yeah, you had hair back then. So tell us, it's my favorite question for this podcast. Why San Diego State and why journalism? What got you hooked on journalism and why San Diego State?
Well, I think I didn't go to San Diego State for journalism, but San Diego was a place that, growing up in Orange County, I kind of wanted more diversity, which ironically, I go to San Diego, which isn't that diverse, but I thought it was. And I just I grew up around the beach, and obviously San Diego is one of the most beautiful cities in the country. I also wanted to get away. I'm an only child. So I thought it was important for me to get away, but not too far, where I could still do my laundry somewhere and see my parents, who I was very close to. So San Diego was far. It was far enough, right? That's where it started. Went down, and it was a really fun experience. And so journalism really, I don't know how rare it is. Talking to people, I think it's rare, but I always knew I wanted to be a writer, a storyteller. It goes back to like first grade. We made our own, which is pretty ahead of its time. We made like our own, I call them graphic novels, but they were comics. So we all did like a comic book. And so mine was called Dog Wars, and it was Star Wars, but with dogs. And so Chewbacca was a man though, like he was it was a spin again, telling a story in my own way, right? And so it won this like city award, and it got put at the library, the Fullerton Library, and so people like would come and like read it, and so I would like we'd go there as a class, and I would just stand back and see all these people enjoying my story, and it really gave me a fulfillment of like wow, like I'm bringing something that I thought of and drew all these characters and told this story. And actually, people are like listening and like sharing it and enjoying it. So I think it gave me that kind of false confidence of like, I have something to say and it's going to be enjoyed by people. So I took that and, I wrote for the high school paper a little bit. And then when I went to San Diego State, I think I declared probably like that first year of journal. I knew I wanted to do English journalism somewhere along those lines. And so, the journalism school was great. The paper was really good for me, meeting other like-minded people who love to tell stories like yourself. I'd never been in that environment. For me, like I was always concerned with like, I love to do things, but are all the cool people doing that, and cool people aren't in your book, cool people necessarily aren't in the paper, but they were my people in a lot of ways, and so I think when you're younger, you kind of are finding yourself, and being biracial too. I think it's like you're always trying to find your place because you kind of don't see anyone like you. But then as you get older, you kind of, it's not what they look like, it's who they are, what they're passionate about, what they love doing, and so forth. So finding that group at the Aztec in high school, it was basketball. Like I hung out with the basketball players. And so at the paper, some of my first like friends were at the Aztec, and, just, loving sports. I was always a huge sports fan and, telling those stories, but I was always more interested in Sports Illustrated or like Jim Downey, or what was the Muhammad?
Alan Malamud.
Yes.
Notes on the scorecard.
Yeah, so I was always interested in those type of stuff. Like, yeah, the games, I'd either watch the game. I don't need to read about it after I watched it. I know who won, and I was more interested in like these either longer pieces that you'd see in Sports Illustrated, where like the writer gets to spend time with the person, and you're talking about things not necessarily related to who won or whatnot. And then those kind of columns, which were like stuff off the top of your dome, sports related, but almost like adjacent to how they kind of fit into the culture, or to tell those sports stories in a new way. That's what I was attracted to. So I don't know if you remember, but I covered women's sports at the Aztec. I didn't really try to cover football or any of the other stuff. I was more interested, in like women's tennis and like soccer, and like obviously that was way before like people were paying attention. Not that I was ahead of my time, but I was always interested in those stories more because no one was telling those stories, and those people were just as interesting to me as the football players. So, yeah, I think it started there. And then film was always something I was like a closet nerd. I would do like nerdy stuff. I had a thing that since I was little, I wrote, it was like a Roger Ebert, how he did, was it Ebert or Leonard Maltin? I don't know. They had a book where like they had all their films reviewed. So I used to have like a thing that I made with like grading films, like just, crazy stuff, but always like a film lover. And so I don't know if I would have pursued film at my undergrad, but then I graduated, moved to LA, because then I was like, all right, I need some diversity, like real diversity, but I still need to do laundry at my parents, so I moved to LA, and I'd always been to LA, growing up, going to Dodger games, Laker games. My dad had businesses in LA, so I was very familiar with the city. So yeah, coming up here and living on couches and pursuing journalism. I did have a small stop at the OC Register. And so, yeah, I skipped one part is in San Diego State. I basically stopped writing for the paper and I started writing for music magazines, which I forgot to say. And so throughout the second half of my college, my undergrad, I was writing for like mainly like Mean Street Magazine, which was like a Orange County zine, and getting to meet like all kinds of my favorite bands like Sublime, Bad Religion, No Effects, The Specials. But that started with San Diego State because you sent me, or I asked to be sent to Board Aid, which used to be this old um, thing up in Bear Mountain where they'd have snowboarders. It was like an X Games, but with bands. And so I went and covered that, and I actually got to interview musicians. Again, I wasn't really, I don't want to interview snowboarders. We took pictures of snowboarders, but I interviewed the bands. So I got to meet like Bradley from Sublime, which was like a huge thing for me because I was a huge fan, and Greg from Bad Religion, and all these like people that I really looked up to. And I was like, oh, I can talk to these guys like just as I can with these athletes, probably have better conversations actually. So that's when I was like, oh, let me write music. And so I started interviewing in bands, and I wrote for a bunch of music magazines throughout the second half of my undergrad. So getting back to the Register, I left. And, after I left, the editor actually reached out to me. He's like, why'd you quit? And I was like, oh, it just wasn't for me. And he actually asked me if I wanted to do like features, like more kind of in-depth pieces, which I wanted to do. But by that time I was up in LA, and I was then doing like, I was an editor, things were moving to digital, and I just saw print journalism, dying. I just didn't see a future in it. So I moved to digital, which was like I was then doing like an editor of like a city guide. Back in the day, like when the internet was like starting up, there were all these like AOL city guide, and it'd be like kind of like things where like, where's the hottest restaurant? And there's still remnants of it today. Each city would have like its own, where's the nightlife and where do you take kids and all this stuff. So I was like the de facto nightlife guy I became. So I was writing like club reviews and bar reviews, and I'd get a stipend, and I'd call my buddies up and say, hey, I got, $100, we can go spend at a bar, on a Tuesday. So that wasn't hard, and so I just moved to LA. So I was writing about nightlife and getting paid for it, and then getting all of my friends and I on these lists that would, go around Hollywood, and was doing that for a couple of years. And then I was like, this is kind of getting old, and and so I better think of something. And so again, I always wanted to get in film, and then I went and got my master's at Cal State Northridge, and as a screen TV and film screenwriting, and through that, it just kind of gave me a real kind of what San Diego State did for me for journalism, Northridge did for me with film, which it wasn't really teaching me how to write. It was teaching me the craft, or like the rules. I think with journalism it was more of the rules, right? And then with film, it was more of the craft. Studying older films, foreign films, learning how to pitch your ideas, and all that stuff. So that was a great experience. I actually was not a great student in my undergrad, unfortunately. But I was a really good student in my grad student class, graduated top of my class, got to teach a year, got to teach undergrad, which was crazy. Like me as a teacher, if you would have seen me at San Diego State, you would have never seen that. But taught a year at Northridge, and it was a wonderful experience. And through that, I wrote a script that got me work with some directors, and then I was like writing for a while, ghost writing mainly, and then through that, after a couple of years of that, I was like, you know what, I kind of want to tell my own stories. And what's the easiest kind of story to tell for me? Well, like docs are great because I started as a journalist, and now I'm have a master's in film, and I've written a couple things. Combine those things, and so that's what documentary filmmaking is. It's really a combination of those, where I can take my journalism skills of interviewing and finding a story and research and all that stuff, combining that with the cinematic side, which is how to make something look nice, how to put a long form story together. I'm always thinking as a writer, even now making docs, it's like how can I make things? I know they're real people telling real stories, but I'm always interested in telling those stories in almost a narrative way with set pieces or, different ways to do that. So it's not just talking heads. So it's really a combination of the two of the things I'm most passionate about and most familiar with as well.
We're going to start to wrap things up here. There's a couple more things before we conclude this week's podcast. I think the through line for this, as I think about our conversation, Patrick, is just writing, just all the different ways that you've written throughout your life, and that also includes writing for the website, your own personal website, writing your own LinkedIn, writing the copy for your trailers, what you write in order to get money, the elevator pitch. Basically you write something in your head and you spew it out to someone in the elevator, metaphorically. So let me get your thoughts on just the craft of writing and how you stay consistent and to the point with your writing, wherever that might go.
I think writing is something I'm always doing. You don't have to have a pen or now in front of a keyboard to write. My wife always, especially early on when we dated, she's like, your head's, you're everywhere, but not here. And I thought about that. And it's like, I'm kind of, yes, in a way, but I'm always thinking about like a story, or I do with my son now when we're driving and he gets bored in the car. I'm like, oh, point at someone. What do you think their story is? Right. And you're kind of just always, I think that's writing. I think thinking about storytelling is writing in your head. And you're always trying to come up with things that you see, incorporate things that you feel. You never stop writing. I do feel that it's a muscle. So the other side of that is that you do have to type. You do have to write something. I think, now I'm not writing stories as much, but I do, like you said, I'm writing decks. Decks to pitch. I'm writing voiceover. I'm finding a quote that will be a text on a film, or I'm like, it's never stops. And that's kind of the gift and the curse of being a storyteller, is you're always thinking about the next story and how to tell it. And I don't think that ever stops. And you just have to really find people that understand that about you. I don't think I'm like the only one that has been called aloof or a scatterbrain. It's just like that storytellers, we're always thinking of ways to tell stories, that hopefully affect people and make people think, inspire people. I don't think that ever stops. And I don't think it can, I don't think it can stop, really. I think once you don't feel that need anymore, you're probably, found something else to do. But I bet you're still thinking about it, even though you're not writing down anything.
I want people to be able to go watch the various different projects that you've created. So whether it's websites, whether it's different platforms, tell people different things that you've done and where people can view them.
Yeah, you can go to my website. It's bypatrickgreen.com. There's trailers, there's articles that I've written in the past, all kinds of stuff there. We'll also have some news about Sincerely Los Angeles, I'm sure, pretty soon, where you can see it. We're really excited about that. And hopefully it will come out in 2025. So, you can follow my social media. I'll be posting about it. And, Instagram, X, Twitter, it's all BY Patrick Green. The production company, SomeoneGreatPictures.com, is me and my buddy James. We make docs, but we also do branded content, any type of film stuff you need, storytelling, branded, whatever, short films, whatever it may be, reach out. We really love telling stories from the inside out, and incorporating whatever aspects of culture, art, sports, into the storytelling. So it's not just what it's about, but like what kind of feeling are you get from watching it?
I'm sure that I left out a lot. We only have so much time. So I want to give you the floor for any other thing that you want to put out there, whether it's advice that you want to give, whether it's another project that you're working on. I know we've kind of bounced all over the place, but I think it's important to say, what did I forget that you want to get across before we wrap things up?
I think recently I've been thinking about community. There's people like yourself who are always gathering people together from the past to talk about things that are happening now. It's good to reflect, but it's also good to talk about who we are now. You're one of those people that bring people together. And I think as an artist, as a creative, you're always working kind of in a kind of silo, right? You're always looking at the kind of next thing and how do I get that done? But really, there's a whole world going on around outside of that. And I think we tend to forget it, especially in the world of today, where you're posting something, for instance, about something you did or something new with your son or your wife or whatever, and maybe you're interacting with people in the comments or the DM, but really it's about how do we connect with people in our community. I'm trying slowly to get back into that, of like checking in with people, doing things that maybe making some time to grab a coffee and really build that community around you, because I think in days like today, like those are the people you lean on in a time when our times are tough right now in terms of people are looking to for their next gig or to network. And it's really important not to just reach out to people when you need something or but really like what's up, what's new, what's going on with your life. I think that's something that I forget, that I'm trying to get better at, is to reach out and really get in touch with people. And like from a human standpoint, I think my films do that, but I think I'm constantly trying to evolve and get back to that place, or even make the community bigger, right? And reaching out. I think that's important. I think it's something that we're forgetting, because that's kind of where your support system comes from. When you try to do these things, right? Like when you try to do a new story or a new project, like the people around you are really the people who are going to help you get to those places, because they can seem, Sisyphus, in a lot of ways. Doing anything nowadays is so hard, and everyone, don't go online to do it because they'll kill you about, don't do that. Don't waste your time, like, so it's important. And I'm learning about that, of being a husband and a father and a filmmaker and a storyteller and an SDSU alum, as like Cal State Northridge alum, all these things that make up who I am. I think it's important to like share that, but also like give back and do things like this or whatever way I can is important.
I like the expression, who are the board of directors in your life, right? Who are the people that you lean on? I got this idea. Like, what do you think? Am I going in the right direction with this? What am I forgetting? I think it's just important that you always think about who are the board of directors in your life that you can lean on to get advice when the time comes.
Yeah, that's for sure. I've always been against, like, see, my instinct is to not listen to people, but the older I get, the more I'm listening and then kind of taking about what I want to listen to. But it's important to listen because they care, right? And if you're going to them for advice, you might not agree with it, but you should listen to it, and maybe there is truth into it. And I think with age, I think you are more open to that, because growing up, you just kind of want to go against the system. That's kind of how I was, and that's probably why I didn't fit into the journalism thing quite right. But the place I'm at now, kind of, I love journalism, but I also love this kind of punk rock side of it, of like telling your own stories in your own way.
The punk rock side of things. I like it. I like it an awful lot, my friend. All right. We like to wrap things up by bragging about other San Diego State alums. It doesn't have to be someone who is a filmmaker or a journalist, but it's always a whole lot more convenient if it is. So the floor is yours. Whoever it is that you want to shout out, or just whether you know them or not know them, just who has inspired you from San Diego State that you want to shout out.
Carl Weathers, didn't he go to San Diego State?
Yeah, he did. Apollo Creed.
Apollo Creed. No, honestly, it's like I said. I mean, I'm sure people have nominated you, but I think what you do is amazing. I think it's so cool. Like, honestly, you were one of the first people I looked up to, and I didn't look up to many people, but it was cool to see someone so, back then young, and you were so on top of things, and you were so like, I just love passionate people, like whether they be passionate about like whatever they do, even at that age. I could recognize it. And I'm sure the other people that were a part of the Aztec could too, of like, you're just passion. You were so like into it, and like you made other people feel that. And I think that's why people were attracted to the Aztec back during those days of like, hey, this can be fun. It's also like work, and there's also a way to do it correctly, which, for someone like me, I was always like, oh, I don't want to do that. But I was always drawn to like, the people that like to break the rules are also drawn to rules to see how far they can stretch them. And so you even back then were so good about connecting people. And then when you moved to LA, we connected, and even now we talk, when we can. It's always a pleasure. But I think it's important to have that, of people who remind you of who you are and where you came from, because we tend to get lost in the day-to-day crap. And so it's always good to kind of talk back and remember, those days when I was a conflicted, wannabe journalist who used to do columns from the toilet. So yeah, it's good to talk to you, and it's important to have people like you that give so much back to the school and the community.
Well, that's extremely kind for you to say, and I really appreciate it. It means a lot. And I love connecting with you whenever we do. It may not be on a daily basis, but I always know that when I'm going to talk to Patrick, he's got something really fun that he's working on, something interesting, and I can't wait to find out. So thank you for being on this podcast, sharing your story, your stories, and I can't wait to see Sincerely Los Angeles and everything else that you continue to do in the future, Patrick.
Thanks, Josh.
Once again, that is Patrick Green. Go to his website, bypatrickgreen.com. bypatrickgreen.com. I'm your host, Josh Suchon. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Where You At podcast, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you're at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms in person or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.